Today's discussion is part of a series of CALM virtual events this spring about how communication professionals are managing in a changed world. You can find upcoming events by clicking on the virtual events link from CALM's homepage at bu.edu/CALM. This webinar is being recorded. You'll have a chance to engage with our two speakers by putting your questions in the Q&A a little later in this session. And now I'm going to introduce Amy Shanler and Justin Joseph. I'll read their bios and then turn it over to them for the conversation. And I'm going to do this in alphabetical order, starting with Justin Joseph, who's Associate Professor and Co-Director of PR Lab. A two-time CALM alum, he's helped lead public relations and crisis communications for some of the biggest names in consumer technology, education, and healthcare. Most recently, he served as Director of Global Public Relations for Teladoc Health, the world's largest virtual healthcare company. Over the past 2 decades, Justin has served as a media spokesperson and has overseen internal and external communication efforts for Houghton Mifflin Harcourt and consumer electronics giants Nikon USA and Canon USA. Justin has been teaching at CALM since 2009. His courses include crisis communication, media strategies and management, business essentials for communicators, professional presentations, and PR Lab. Now let's talk about Amy Shanler, who is Associate Professor and Co-Director of PR Lab. Amy has managed communications activities for multiple organizations and industries, including retail, technology, business, healthcare, nonprofit, and entertainment for nearly 25 years. She currently teaches PR Lab as well as PR Principles and Crisis Management. Before joining the BU faculty full-time, Amy served as Director of PR for Philips in North America and earlier, Director of PR for Staples. She's also a CALM alum. Now let me turn it over to Justin and Amy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dean DeChristina. We really appreciate this opportunity to be here today to speak a little bit about this topic, which we're finding there's so many opinions about it. And we're seeing that a little bit in the poll that we're taking right now. If you haven't had a chance to participate in the poll, we encourage you to do that at this time. The question we're asking is, how do you feel about the way brands are communicating with you during this COVID-19 time? And I think a lot of us have some very strong opinions on this. Amy and I want to take some time today to walk us through what brands are thinking during this time. We want us to take a look at some of the brands that are doing it well, some of the brands that are putting their perspectives to use properly. We're going to see a lot of words like mission and purpose. We're going to hear words like adding to the clutter and adding to the noise. We're going to see a little bit of that during our time today as well. We want to show you some great examples. We want to also show you some poor examples during our time as well today. But in all of it, it is important to recognize we are walking through a very different time, a time that we're not used to in crisis communication. Typically speaking, we used to see crisis communication as simply this: what is the perception of my brand during a difficult time? So whether it's Chipotle and E. coli outbreaks, or United Airlines and a passenger being dragged off the airline, we always saw crisis comms as one brand working on their perception. And now we're starting to see every brand try to figure out, how do I communicate all at the same time today? So just a couple of quick things for all of us who are participating today. We definitely encourage you to take part in the poll. If you do have any questions, we encourage questions. Amy and myself, we teach together a lot, and so we love questions. So feel free to use the chat feature or the raise hand feature, and we'll certainly allow for some time at the end of our discussion today for some questions as well as discussion. Here's one of those memes that I think a lot of us have seen circulating over the last couple of weeks, and I hope this is something that you've seen or at least have experienced in some way. Every brand communicating to me at the same time, and this question of, do I care? Does it add value? Does it not? Does it just add to the clutter? There's no question. This virus has affected us all, and it's changed the way brands communicate. And if you've seen brands reaching out to you during this time, and I'm personally going to say, every email address I've ever given out to a brand, it was returned to me during these last couple of weeks with multiple messages, with brands telling me we're in this together, or brands telling me that we're here to support you along the way. Brands that I probably hadn't thought about 10, 15 years are suddenly telling me that they're in this fight together with me. And so we want to take some time to talk about that, to see if that's a good way of going about our business, or is this a better way to look at all of this brand communication during a time like this?
Why don't we end our polling and share the results, JJ, just so we can get a sense of how we're feeling before we dive into some of the realities facing brands today. You should be able to see our poll results right now. And as you can see, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? We're not really sure. It seems like some of the communications are helpful and some are not. And I would agree with that, definitely. And we're going to show you some of those examples, as JJ said. There are some of you who aren't sure. They're all sounding the same to me. Some of you saying, I don't know that they're saying anything relevant to me, but I think what's most illustrative here is that nobody is saying, I feel so much love and support. And nobody is saying, I feel reassured about my safety. And there are some reasons why, and we're going to get into that. So just as we think about why is this so difficult, brands are having such a tough time right now. And a lot of it is because of just the generalized uncertainty. Yes, a lot of organizations have a crisis plan in place, but there's really no playbook for what we're experiencing right now. There are no firm answers as to how to resolve the crisis, who's going to resolve it, and how it's going to be managed. And compounding all of this uncertainty are these three pressures. First of all, brands know it. They feel it. The uncertainty, the declining income that they're feeling right now, this is a problem. This is going to have an impact on their organizations, on their employees, their partners, their suppliers. They're feeling that right now, that pressure. At the same time, stakeholders like employees and customers, well, they're demanding answers. They want to know what the brand is doing, how they're taking action to protect them. And then we have the pressure to say something, right? To communicate. Many don't know what to say or how to say it for fear of offending or upsetting someone. In fact, some brands aren't saying anything at all. According to a survey from Advertiser Perceptions, nearly half of advertisers have pulled a campaign or delayed it because of the coronavirus. So let's take a look at some of what we're seeing out there today.
Yeah, one of the big things that, as Amy and I were studying this issue, some of the data is pointing to this, but I think what we said before speaks volumes. There is a lot of noise out there from brands right now. And what we saw from your polling as well, it shows that the noise is not coming across in such a way where I'm saying this is adding value to my lives. And so in fact, we wanted to play a couple of seconds of this video that's been circulating a lot on YouTube and a lot of other media outlets today and over the last couple of days. Take a look at how brands are communicating during COVID-19.
So they all start the same way with this somber music, this emotion, right, that they're conveying. We're going to skip ahead and get to some of the other messages.
In times like this, at times like these, during these difficult times,
in these troubled times,
challenging times,
trying times, in these times of uncertainty,
during this time of great uncertainty,
during these uncertain times,
during these uncertain times, uncertain times.
You getting the point here? We'll jump ahead here.
and when we're apart, even if we can't stand closer than 6 feet.
We can all stay connected to work, school, and most importantly, to each other.
There's still ways to touch each other.
All without leaving the comfort and safety of your home. Without leaving the safety of your home.
From home.
Home. Your home at home.
Home. Home. Home. Home.
Home. Home. That's the key. Buick and together.
Together.
Together. Together. Together. Together. Together. Together. Together. Together.
Together. Together. And together.
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 Together. Together.
Together. Together.
And so you get to see a little bit of how brands thought, especially during the early moments and weeks, days after social distancing became a norm. How did they think? They thought, let's put out cliched terms. Let's put out a lot of manufactured language that seems artificial, that doesn't seem to add value into the end user's life. So they would use a lot of those same common terms like together and home and unprecedented times and uncertainty, which are all great words, I guess, in and of themselves. But when every brand is using the same language over and over again, you started to see this noise. And so some of the brands that added to the noise were brands like Audi and Volkswagen and McDonald's, brands that all decided, hey, let's go ahead and take advantage of this crisis, this terrible time, and let's come up with some marketing gimmicks that might help showcase our valuable asset, our logo, championing the cause of social distancing. Now, here's the problem, though. It seems clever. It seems like this is a wise use of our logo, and it really helps to support what the world is doing right now. But what ended up happening was that consumers saw through it as a marketing gimmick, that this is not what we want from you brands right now during a time of social distancing. We want to see you support your workers. We want to see you support your employees. We want to see you do something to help the fight against the virus. We don't need you to put out empty platitudes. And that's where we started to see consumers really rise up against this marketing gimmick notion that many brands took on. Let's think about this for a second. McDonald's, a brand that's not in any way equal to safety and health, is going around telling people to be healthy. And that's not something that we typically would listen to. In the grand scheme of brands or people that I would listen to in a time of safety and health, McDonald's will be right there at the bottom. And so when that brand comes and tells me, hey, you should social distance, their message might be accurate, but it just doesn't come across as having any integrity. And that's where the problem arose.
There are a couple other problems as well. Can we talk about email for a second? I think we're all feeling it, as Justin said at the beginning, right? We're getting spammed on every address from any organization we've ever done business with. And unfortunately, it's making the situation worse. It's adding to that noise, right? Some of the emails just don't make plain sense, right? Like a photo printing company telling me to practice mindfulness, but not to forget to use my Together discount code, right? I know this is resulting from that economic pressure we spoke about earlier, but it just feels like the profit matters more than the person here. And that's leaving a bad taste in people's mouths. Look, it does make sense for a brand to reach out if it does have something to say. If you are providing information on new sanitation protocols, for example, or new options for vulnerable populations to get goods and services that they need, well, sure, let's talk about it. Let's share that information because that's important. There's something that our stakeholders need to know here. And in addition to the email, we have a couple other problems that have crept in and created some noise. Let's talk about that government bailout program, which is meant to help so many small businesses. But when brands like Shake Shack or Ruth's Chris or the LA Lakers, when it became public that they were receiving that bailout money, well, consumers had a big problem with that. Now, because of that pushback, these companies are in fact giving the money back to the government, which is good. But why should these brands have come under fire to begin with, right? This was just something that could have been avoided. Consumers are not shy about holding brands accountable. In fact, in a recent Edelman survey, 71% of respondents said that businesses perceived as putting profit ahead of people are going to permanently lose trust. I'm going to end this poll here. I'm going to just stop sharing that. I don't know why that popped up there, but that's okay. So in addition to this, we've got another challenge facing brands, some more noise, let's say, to add into the conversation. And these are some accidental challenges. These are brands who have had to join the conversation when they really didn't want to. So Pepsi got pulled into it, and their makers, Johnson & Johnson, when there were some rumors that there were some positive correlation between Pepsi users and curing COVID-19. And so now Johnson & Johnson had to pivot and do proactive communication to, first of all, remind people that this is a treatment for heartburn. It's not a prevention or treatment for COVID-19. Johnson & Johnson also had to tell their regular customers, we're working as hard as we can to get you your product back that you really do need. And then, of course, we can all remember Lysol and how they had to suddenly jump into a conversation and remind people not to inject or ingest cleaning products into their bodies. So as we talked about, lots of noise, a lot of talking without actually saying anything. So Justin, what should brands really be doing here?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you stating that too, Amy, because that's where the mistake was. Brands that were talking platitude over purpose is where we saw the mistake happen with some brands like those. Let's take a look at some brands that did it better, that figured out what valuable assets do we have, what resources do we have at our disposal that we can now use to not only help the situation, but to demonstrate to our stakeholders that we care. And it's much more than saying we care, we're going to do something about it. One example that quickly came to mind was the Metropolitan Opera and how they went about quickly saying, we're going to make our performances streaming for free, so that you don't have to pay extra for it, but while you're at home, here's an added value that we can deliver to you. Brands like Planet Fitness or Reebok, who said, tell us what you have at home and we will customize a workout strategy or workout plan for you, or we will make all of our online classes free for the next 2 weeks, or whatever it might be. This was, again, a demonstration. We have an asset that you could use to add value to your lives in your current situation, and we will use it. I think this is where a lot of people saw the efforts of brands like Louis Vuitton, a luxury brand that typically does not get involved in issues like this, saying we are going to stop production at our perfume factories and we're going to turn them into hand sanitizer manufacturers. And so that resonated well with audiences. That's something, again, platitude or purpose. Which one are we going to focus on? Brands that focused on purpose tended to do better. I think Molson Coors is a great example of this, where this brand said that we're going to take care of vulnerable communities right now, been hit particularly hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. So this company donated $1 million to the United States Bartenders Guild. So you'll notice again, that purpose goes very much in line with their mission and what they do day to day. It's a nonprofit that supports bartenders and service industry professionals. Molson Coors said, look, we'll provide 50,000 cans of water to the Denver branch of the Salvation Army to help nourish Denver's homeless population. And most importantly, they said, we're going to just keep our breweries open so that we can produce hand sanitizer and deliver them to the front lines, whether that was to law enforcement agencies or to hospitals and those in the healthcare world. That, again, that idea of purpose over platitude became the heart of what these brands decided to do. We see it with brands that said, we'll withhold CEO compensation, or we'll make sure that our CEOs and our executives are not taking the same pay so that we don't have to furlough or lay off employees. Those brands resonated well. So again, we're seeing a big difference from the brands that simply said, we're in this together, versus the brands that did something. There's a major difference, and the brands that demonstrated their capabilities tended to do much better with audiences.
In addition to those operational changes, we're seeing a lot of brands step up and support the cause through charitable efforts. And it's worth noting, similar to the Coors situation, Netflix created a $100 million relief fund to help members of the creative community who have now been left unemployed. Procter & Gamble is not only working from a manufacturing standpoint, but in total, their donations worldwide have added up to more than $15 million. Unilever, in addition to global efforts, also did some great charitable work locally, where it's distributed more than 200,000 masks to hospitals around New Jersey, where it's headquartered. But we also love that this company has decided to declare a day of service on May 12th, where every essential item that Unilever produces that day is going to be donated. And then you have Spotify, a company that doesn't seem to have any connection to the virus. What are they doing on this list? Well, they realize they actually do. One of their stakeholder groups, artists, have really been adversely affected by the situation. They can't hold concerts anymore, so they've lost some revenue there. And so Spotify allowed a new feature, one of which allows artists to fundraise directly from their profile pages. So those have been some good steps that have been received positively. And so what Justin and I want to do is wrap up for you the reasons why, what's working here, and what are those tips that we can take as communicators to move forward with our conversations. So the first thing that we need to, of course, talk about is this notion that you can't just talk the talk. You have to take action. Instead of sending hope and prayers, we're seeing companies that are stepping up that really show how they care. And according to the Kantar COVID-19 Barometer study, 77% of respondents expect brands to be helpful in this new everyday life and this new normal. 2/3 of consumers are expecting brands to inform them about their specific efforts to combat the issue at hand. So it's important that we don't just have those platitudes that Justin is talking about, that we back that up with action. And while we're taking action, accompaniment while we're taking action, it's important that we do so with empathy here. Our first instinct when something bad happens is that our emotions want to take over, right? We want to do something, and that's just human nature. But when we let our emotions lead too much, yeah, sure, we put a lot of heart into something, but it may not be what our stakeholders really need. So as hard as it is, we need to put our emotions aside for a little bit, and as communicators, really think about what our stakeholders need. And then look at how does their need overlap with what we can actually do, what we can offer. And that overlap is going to give you that best course of action. Consumers are looking to brands to do the right thing. Another research study, this one from Edelman, said that almost 2/3 of the country, or 2/3 of consumers believe that this country will not endure the crisis unless brands step up and unless they take action in a significant way in our relief efforts. And you've seen some great examples from Justin of what some socially conscious companies are taking action where it's needed most. And my final point on this is really thinking about this communications situation from the long-term perspective. I know it's really hard to do because we're taking the virus day by day and hour by hour, and that does create a lot of short-term uncertainty. But as you're deciding what actions to take, think about strengthening your relationships with all your stakeholders, but over the long term. Months or years from now, people won't remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. And so let's look at investing in those relationships for the long term so that we can make our stakeholders feel good through those appropriate actions. What else, Justin?
Yeah, I think another big tip that we should keep in mind for all communicators is we've got to make sure that our stakeholders realize we are truly putting people ahead of profit. So there is a lot of talk around this area, but there has to be that clear, decisive decision-making and action to back it up. That same study that Amy quoted before from Edelman, which is a major communications firm, if you're not familiar with them, interviewed 12,000 people in several countries. And again, that statement that Amy made earlier is important here. 71% of respondents said that if they perceive a brand to put profit over people, they plan to lose trust in that brand forever. And that's not an easy thing to say from a stakeholder to a brand. They said that they want brands to not only speak about products in ways that show they're aware of the crisis, but they want to see if brands can speak to the impact this crisis is having on people's lives. This is why the notion of people ahead of profits is so critical, especially now. And I think both of us believe going forward. And so this is something that we're going to have to be very aware of. So what does that mean again? That means keeping employees employed, keeping employees safe, making sure that executives are not gouging employees, whether it's through salaries or anything else, maybe even lightening up some of the rules on customers and solving real world issues, offering value. I think about an airline like Delta Airlines, which was able to say very quickly, we're going to change our cancellation policy right away because that's what will make your lives better. I would say our fourth tip that we really want you to take from this is to focus on the care and the well-being of employees and other stakeholders, as we stressed before. Big majorities of consumers are paying attention to consumer and corporate behavior right now, especially from data that we're seeing from FTI Consulting. More than 8 in 10 are paying attention to leaders and CEOs to see how they step up at times like this. How much are they concerned with the safety of their employees? This is not something that we would typically see at such a high level. So for example, if Amazon is forcing employees to come in and work at a distribution center or a warehouse, and rather than sending out essential items, food and things that deal with clothing or shelter, if they're sending out items that have to do with play or fun or family vacations or things that don't have much to do with essentials, stakeholders now view that brand as not caring about employees, and that's going to be critical. The fifth and final tip that we wanted to share with you today is really this, that all brands, it doesn't matter if you're an educational brand, a corporate brand, a nonprofit, a government association, you've got to adapt your strategy and adjust your tone. I think about brands like KFC, which for generations has had an ad campaign simply saying that it's finger licking good. That's not possible anymore. That's not something we can say anymore. Think about a brand like Geico, which until very recently had a campaign that was very public about high-fiving. That's not possible anymore. And so we've got to adapt our strategy. We have to adjust our tone. We have to think about the context. Are we being helpful? Does this creative still make sense? Is it appropriate at a time like this? Are these products or services that people think about as adding value to their lives right now in the way that we're living? Is there a risk of us coming across as profiteering or opportunistic? Is the tone of my content appropriate for right now? Am I going to say or do something that comes across as insensitive to people who are losing loved ones or potentially have a loved one in the hospital right now? All of that is critical. We used to always say that brands can be humorous as far as they want to go. They can push the envelope, but today we're going to be very careful about that. There is a place for humor, but we're going to be much more sensitive. So adapt your strategy and adjust your tone.
So we've talked a lot, and we definitely want to open this up for some Q&A from you before we wrap up. So if there aren't any questions, well, if you have questions, you can use the Q&A function on the webinar to type them in. I know it might take a few seconds for you to put in your questions or comments.
We have some questions coming in.
Great.
Let's see.
Oh, there's some hellos from former students. That's great to see.
Former students, good to see you all.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So one of the things that might be on your mind, because it certainly was on mind as I was thinking about it this morning, is that a lot of the examples that we talked about were very visible, and it's because they were large brands. It's information that's easy to access. But you might ask yourselves, how can a small organization, they don't have $100 million to donate. They're just trying to keep the lights on, right? Do these tips apply? And they absolutely do apply. They are, they're taking action. And I think that's what we're getting out from this question here from Kelsey. Do you have advice for how companies with few resources can follow your first tip and help through action instead of just spirit? So yeah, we were definitely on the same page there, Kelsey. What I've seen are companies adjust their business a little bit. So for example, in my town, we have a toy store. They're not essential. But what they did do was push out through social media that they can do phone orders and home delivery. And I have seen an incredible level of customer service. We do puzzles in our house right now. That's something that's been going on. And so I called the store and I said, what puzzles do you have? And he texted me pictures. I gave him my credit card information, and about 3 hours later, it was sitting on my doorstep. I mean, that's just something small that, he could adapt his business model to be able to meet the needs of what communities really need right now.
I think that's so important. We have a question from Julie in the chat who's writing, how can these types of lessons apply to internal communications with staff and employees? What sorts of things should we be doing internally to communicate with staff and show that we care? Julie, I think this is a big, deep question that I think brands are really going to have to learn over these next few months. Here's personally what I would be focused on. I think a lot of it would be focused on listening, giving employees a chance to communicate and give us an opportunity to listen. I think brands struggle more when they decide, hey, let's just do a lot of talking right now. Let's tell employees what they should be doing, how they should be feeling, and then let's throw out those platitudes. We're in this together. We care deeply. But what we're finding more and more is give employees an opportunity to speak. You as a brand, take some time to listen and then craft your messaging around that. I would say that many employees in many cases are probably motivated or probably influenced by a ton of fear right now. So how do you address fear, for example? Is it through emails that tell them that their jobs are at stake or that profits are at stake right now? No, I think a lot of it has to come back to finding places of security in those places. You've got to find ways to communicate that we care about you, that we want to possibly adjust policies. So probably sick leave policies or maternity or paternity leave policies. See what policies can be adjusted at this time to show, remember again, show not tell employees that we do care about you and we're making appropriate changes to show that.
Just building on that, JJ, there's a question in here from Jeff that wants to talk a little bit about nonprofit versus for-profit during this time. And I think that's very related to what you were saying before, right? The same considerations are there. You still have employees and you still need to keep them safe, even though you're still mission focused when you're that nonprofit organization. The challenge for nonprofits right now is that your cause might not be at the forefront of what's on consumers' minds. And so what we need to do is, number one, be respectful. Okay, if we're not going to add value, then we need to take a step back. And I know that can be really challenging when it comes to donations, when it comes to all of those metrics that we need as a nonprofit organization to sustain ourselves. I know that can be really challenging right now, but can you still identify what your stakeholders need? Those people that you're benefiting, those causes that you're fighting for, how does this current situation affect them? And simply acknowledging that is a great place to start, to just open up that conversation to say, I know this is hard on you because of X, Y, and Z. We're still here to support you. That's a great place to start. You're not asking them for anything, but you're showing appropriate empathy, and what you can provide right now is just some care and support. So I hope that helps, but it might make sense that you might have to pivot and pull back a little bit on your planned conversation, as JJ was talking about with tone. Adjust your tone, because right now, some of those focus areas, those missions are just not where our focus needs to be.
Yeah. Molly, thank you for your question. It says, any thoughts about response for smaller companies applying for a PPP loan when they didn't need it or use it for payroll? Will there be a long-term reputational problem? Now, this is critical, Molly. In the past, we would probably say, look, do what you want to, say what you want to, that type of thing. But in this case, I think we're going to be a little more careful, because the call for transparency has become louder than ever before as well. So if you didn't use it for payroll, I think one of the things that your internal stakeholders are going to be asking is, what were they used for? And so if they were still used for organizational benefit in some way that can help internal stakeholders, then I say you should be very vocal about that and speak openly about that. If it was used for something else, this is one of those rare instances. We have to be open, transparent, and honest about what they were used for, and think about how the employee is going to take that. Now more than ever, something that the College of Communication has always stressed is know your audience. This is the time where we have to know our audience more than ever. If our employees, who might be disgruntled with us already, are seeing our leadership take advantage of funds that are available for employees and not using it for employees, you might be opening up a new can of worms, a new crisis that could get exacerbated more and more over time. So I would encourage in your organization, Molly, think about transparency, think about open and honest communication, especially now more than ever.
And we have a question from Carlos about how the pandemic might influence the presidential election. And the follow-up question is, what can you do if the president is the principal source of information, disinformation, or misinformation? I think I added an extra information in there. Yeah, that's tricky. I wish I had a good answer for how it's going to influence the presidential election. I think I would go back to those best practices that we talked about. People need to see action. People need action directed at the right places. That's what consumers are looking for right now. Those pressures that we talked about, the economic uncertainty and stakeholder need, that's bearing down no matter who is providing the information. So do I have a crystal ball to be able to tell how it will affect the election? I don't, but I still stand firm to those principles of communication that we have been, that Justin and I have built our careers on, which is people matter, action matters, empathy matters, long-term perspective matters. Those are the keys to what's going to help consumers. Now, I do trust our system that there are a lot of voices out there helping to share information, helping to make sure that people are getting the right information that they need in terms of not only the disease and best practices for how we should be operating, but also thinking about plans for the future. I am confident that we do have experts, subject matter experts in place, particularly at the local government, state level, that are going to really be the ones to drive us through this recovery. Those are going to be the ones that are going to take us forward. So I hope that helps, Carlos. JJ, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I think what you said is so important. I mean, we typically work with brands, and political communication is probably not our expertise area, but what you say about brands goes across the board when it comes to political communication. That's why it's critical, I think. Yeah. Susan's got a great question. Susan, it's great to see you on this chat. Hi, thank you both for taking the time to do this. Building off internal comms, any tips on best practices to use internal communications to rebuild culture and trust after there have been layoffs, furloughs within an organization? That is an outstanding question. Here's what I would say, Susan. There's no tips here. I think we're all learning as we go along, but I'll tell you this, having communicated through a few layoffs and even a Chapter 11 filing in my career, I'll tell you this, the best way to do it is to be, again, a listener. And I think building a listening culture is critical here. I remember at times where we would hold town halls where all we did was listen instead of sitting there and trying to dictate to employees what the culture is going to be. That's not typically the way that culture is formed. I would encourage you, wherever it's possible, use this opportunity as a restart, if that makes sense. Use it as an opportunity to hit the reset button on your organization's culture where we can now be the leaders going forward. You've got to imagine, especially after layoffs or furlough, you're looking at demoralized employees. You're probably looking at employees who've lost some motivation at this point. So how can you feed into that a little bit? How can you encourage? How can you motivate? But try to do it with taking in a lot of buy-in from those employees who are still there. Bring them to the table, let them speak openly and honestly, listen wherever you can, offer opportunities for feedback and follow-up. And I think those are going to be very important, especially their layoffs are never easy, obviously, but one of the things I've seen brands do well in the past with layoffs is they simply said, we don't have all the answers. Can we come up with the answers together?
Mm-hmm. And I think building on what Justin said, focusing on values, right? What does the organization value, and including the employees in that conversation is a great way to build this joint ownership, right? This is the only way that we're going to emerge stronger, is if we are all on the same page with what matters to us. So that's going to really help you. Jenna has a question about trying to balance, again, with internal communications. How do we balance transparency with regular communications when we really don't have much to say as we wait for the government to allow us to reopen? That's a big one too. And again, I will sort of go back to what Justin was saying. This is a great opportunity to open up the conversation, and don't feel like you have to do all of the talking, but use conversation as an opportunity to invite listening, to invite feedback. That's a great way to keep the conversation flowing, but in an authentic way. If you truly don't have something to say, don't feel like, because you have to say something, that you have to fill that gap in the conversation. I think that listening to your employees and letting them share some of what's on their mind would be very valuable, to not just saying we're all in this together, but to actually prove that we're here, we're in it together, but here's how we're supporting each other as well.
Great.
So it seems like we might be near the end of the questions at this point. Mm-hmm. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Justin and I and our dean, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really fascinating conversation. We love your questions. We love talking about this. Happy to chat further over LinkedIn. If you want to reach out, I know our emails are on the College of Communication website as well. And we want you to think differently about how you are looking at brand communication. You're in a much better position right now that you've seen both sides of what works and what doesn't work. And as you've seen some of these tips and heard our conversation, you can reflect now on what you're doing and whether it's working or not. As communicators, again, we need to focus on not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. We've got to remember that we're working with people, and that our people are feeling things, and we've got to acknowledge that. And we've also got to be taking a long-term perspective on managing, cultivating our relationships. And if you do this, you'll be in a much better position to help your brand or your clients navigate this uncertain time. I don't want to use a cliche and say we're all in this together, right? But I will say that Justin and I, the College of Communication, we are here, we are looking at this issue, and we do want to continue to help you all as you're trying to sort out these next steps. Dean, do we have anything that we want to say at the end? I
just want to say thanks to everybody for joining. It was great to see you here, and hope you can join for the next one. Again, look at the homepage at www.bu.edu/com to find all of our virtual events coming up. Thanks so much to Justin and Amy. That was really great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.